What is economics and what can you expect to learn from this class this semester? Narrowly speaking, Lionel Robbins, an economist who lived during the middle of the 20th century, he defined it as the allocation of scarce resources among competing ends. And if you think about that, that's an end state, that's an equilibrium. If we have all the information needed to allocate these scarce resources to their most valued uses, we would do it. And this is what it would look like. Well, that's kind of a narrow definition. What I really care about is the broader definition of, well, how do we ever come about to get closer to that equilibrium? That's more of a process. And that's more of the market process that we're going to talk about. We also want to look at economics as learning a structured way of thinking, having a set of tools to develop a structured way of thinking in order to solve problems. So in a way, we're going to look at we're going to see economics as all three. An end state with equilibrium, a process of how markets work to develop that equilibrium or come closer to it, and also as a set of tools for solving problems. So we start with conflict. We live in a world of scarce resources, and so how do we decide how those resources are used? Not far from campus is a tobacco field. Why is that land being used to grow tobacco and not used to grow housing? There's a conflict there. We have to determine how these things are used, how this land is used, how things like your car, all the metal, plastic, rubber, and labor used to produce your car could have been used for something else. Why do you get that? Why was it used for that purpose? And we also want to see is how do we get people to conserve scarce resources? How do we get people to share with others? So, for example, after a hurricane causes tremendous damage at, say, the beach, oftentimes the need for more ice and gas and plywood, etc., increase, and therefore we want people to conserve it. Well, how do we get people to do that? And we also want people to move resources from other areas that weren't adversely impacted and take them to where they're needed most. How do we get people to do that? So the problem, like I said, is limited resources with unlimited competing wants. We want it all, and yet there's not enough to go around. So how do we resolve this conflict? How can we come together to live in a peaceful and prosperous world with this idea that, not the idea, but the reality that resources are limited and we have resources are limited and we have unlimited competing wants. So scarcity means having to choose. And who gets to do the choosing? How do we choose who gets to have your car or that land? How do we do that? And who benefits? Who's the party who benefits and who's the party who bears the cost? Party or parties who bear the costs. And these are the things we must overcome. Now, why? The one way to do it is cooperation, but why that? Why not autarky? Why not live alone? If we all lived on our own islands, there wouldn't be conflict. But we can see where that gets us. If you want a sure way to live in poverty, live in autarky. Live independent of other people. So we benefit by living with each other and cooperating with each other, but that's also part of the conflict. Why? Because we have tribal instincts. We're self-interested, and we have tribal instincts. I have my tribe, you have your tribe, and I want to work to better my tribe. And this causes a zero-sum game. We see the world in zero-sum games. If you and I are independent of each other out hunting, and you shoot a deer, well, that's one fewer deer, one less deer that I get to hunt. You've taken that deer, so that's a zero-sum game. However, with markets, if I'm raising cattle for meat for you, and you're raising wheat to make bread for me, we have mutually advantageous trades. And that's where cooperation comes in. But it's not easy because we live in a complex social system. We have disparate tastes and talents, literally billions of people around the world, all with disparate tastes and talents. And how do we get people to work to serve the greater interests of society? We have to deal with the information problems. Who values what? Where, when, why, how? Who values it most? Who can do things best or at lowest opportunity cost? These are information problems. Nobody can sit there and determine these. We're going to see how it comes about. We also have incentive problems. Even if I had all the relevant information to make all the right decisions, what incentive do I have to get it right? We want to make sure people have the right incentive to work for the interests of everybody and not just themselves. And lastly, people need to adapt to newer changing information. And these are things that are going to come about as these processes change. And so we want people to adapt. So Adam Smith, a moral philosopher who lived during the 18th century, came about with an idea. And it was a very simple idea. Leave people free to specialize in producing what they deem essential. So leave me free to specialize in producing what I think other people want, and then enter into voluntary exchanges with other people. Now I have an incentive to produce what you want, and I have an incentive to do it at the lowest possible cost, so you will trade with me. It doesn't do me any good to specialize in producing, say, bread, but nobody will trade with me for my bread. So I have to serve the interests of others. And it was a really simple idea. And then what happens is order emerges spontaneously. We're going to see how this order comes about and emerges spontaneously. This discovery was not unique to Smith. He did not all of a sudden just create it. Like most things, it develops over time. It spontaneously emerged over years and years of people thinking about these ideas. He was just the first to set it out in a comprehensive doctrine. He wrote that book, a very famous book, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. We'll call it The Wealth of Nations now. And his basic premise was that this decentralized decision-making, you choosing for yourself what to produce and then trade with other people voluntarily, nobody telling you what to do. This decentralized decision-making helps us overcome the information incentive problems. His basic points were specialization. As you specialize, you are more productive than if you had to do a bunch of different tasks all at the same time. By specializing, we can get better at producing more stuff. The exchange has to be voluntary. If I can only trade with you voluntarily, I have to serve your interests. The only way to make me better off is to make you better off. If you're forced to exchange with me, then it doesn't matter if I make you better off. I'm only going to focus on making me better off. Markets need to be competitive. They need to be open to other people coming in. When they're competitive, I always have to work in your interest, and I always have to discover new things. There's more innovation when we have competitive markets. We want more capital. The more capital per worker, the wealthier the society is. And so we need to buy capital, and we need to use capital to be more productive. However, capital is susceptible to being confiscated, and therefore we do need some sort of a system in place in order to protect property rights and contract enforcement, and that's where government comes in. And Smith certainly understood the importance of government. He also looked at the government for helping the poor and education. But he also realized that politicians and government workers are just as self-interested as anybody else, and therefore we need a small but tolerable system of government. And so this order emerges. It's not happening because politicians, bureaucrats, and kings tell us what to do. They don't have the information needed for that, nor do they have the incentive to get it right. So what does cause this order to emerge? Well, Smith called it the invisible hand. And what it is prices, first off. Prices give us information about relative scarcity. If I see the price of ice going up, I know that it's becoming more scarce and I should conserve it. I also know that if I really want to and I could sell my ice to somebody else because I get a higher price for it. The other thing is profits. Profits direct us to utilize resources to where they're wanted most. When you see a company making a lot of money, a lot of profit, then that means they're satisfying unmet wants. And so these prices and profits direct our behavior. We can look at wages as a price. Why are you choosing the major you're choosing? Why not do something more fun? Why not do something that's more relaxing? Well, the higher wage is convincing you to spend your time taking care of this need that people want. So this is what we call the market order. It's an emergent order coordinated through the market process with prices and profits. And people simply interact with each other, voluntarily trading in order to make other people better off. It's neither designed nor controlled. Now again, that's not totally true, as we'll see later on, but it isn't totally controlled. And as Nobel laureate Friedman Hayek once said, markets are of human action, not of human design. Nobody designed them, nobody created them, they just came about through our interacting with each other over centuries. This is best illustrated in Leonard Read's book, I, Pencil. He asks, how many people does it take to produce a pencil? Well, literally millions. Not only do you have to have somebody go into a mine to get the graphite, you need the tools. Not only do you need the lumber to make the wooden part of the pencil, you need a chainsaw to cut the tree down. You need trucks to take the tree to the mill, so therefore you need rubber for the tires. You need plastic for the steering wheel. Once you get to the mill, you need all the steel for the saws. These are processes that are coordinated through prices and profits because nobody has the information to get that right. And that's the beauty of the market process. So the takeaway is economics is a social science. It helps us better understand how we overcome the complex coordination problems that we must overcome. And how do we allocate scarce resources at our disposal to their greatest social advantage? Second, Adam Smith, the father of modern economics, explained how this happens in a spontaneous emergence of order. And lastly, markets are not perfect and don't necessarily provide us all of what we want. Therefore, we do want government. But as Smith said, we have to look at the proper role and size of government as we do this. Now, again, I said markets are competitive. A lot of people don't see that. I want to leave with this great quote by Jonathan Sacks, the chief rabbi of Great Britain.